Welcome back to part 2 of tiling a bathroom. So just a quick reminder, this is what we're aiming for, this is what it ends up looking like. We start off part 2 on sealing in the bath with the resin sealant. So next we mix up the resin that we're going to use. It's a fiberglass resin, the sort of stuff you get from car accessory, auto accessory shops. It's used for making up fiberglass, same sort of stuff they use for car bodies. It's a 2-part resin, and I'm using up say some of the car body filler and other bits of filler I had in the garage. And then you mix in the hardener, normally a ratio of like the size of a golf ball to the size of a pea. Give it a good stir, probably got about 10 minutes before it starts going off and going hard, so you have to work quite quickly. And it's quite smelly, a sort of styrene-y sort of smell. So I'd recommend having some sort of respiratory protection. I quite like to use these old gas masks, army surplus ones that you can get from eBay, which come with, or should come with, a carbon canister for protecting your breathing and absorbing all the vapours. So as I'm doing here, give the resin solution a good mix round. Probably could do with being a little bit more liquid than it is here. But smooth it all around the surface. Try not to get it where you don't want it. It is quite sticky. It does set quite nice and hard. Try and get the surface as flat as you can. You may end up with some imperfections afterwards, but they can be sanded or cut or scraped off. So just before it sets hard, remove the tape. Alright, this is a couple of hours later after laying the resin, and it's all gone hard. Started fitting the side tiles. Obviously that uneven gap there will be filled with sealant later, come to that later. Resin could have done with being a little bit thinner, so there's a couple of little high spots on it, probably had a little bit too much of the filler in with the liquid resin, but an easy way to take off any high spots is just take a saw, just look over the level, see where there's a high spot, and let's see, maybe there's a little one there. Just give it a bit of a wiggle backwards and forwards, and it very easily starts to grind off just the slight high spots in the filler. It's just to make sure the tile sits level. Next, for fitting the tile into this awkward curve shape, we need to make a template. So get some pieces of paper. For these tiles, just so happens that an A4 piece of paper is the same width as the tile, so 3 sheets of paper, a little overlap at the end there. You can come out with a template same size as the tile. Then all we need to do is lay the tile into position, get some sort of blade, scalpel in this particular case, and we can start to cut the paper. Should give us our template as we're going around. Okay, then I'm actually going to mark it on the reverse side of the tile. Normally get a better cut with it shining, with the tile shiny side up going into the cutting disc, but there's not a huge difference. And the edge is going to be covered by sealant anyhow. The reason I'm going to mark up the back is it's easy to get a pencil mark to stay and, well, mark and stay on the back of the tile. So just make sure we get it right around. So it's going to go like that. That's got to go like that. So we are going to draw around our template. So in order to get a curved cut, we could use a jigsaw cutter with a tile cutting blade, but since we've got the disc cutter here, an alternative is to cut lots of slots down with this one, then cut from the side in sections. So let's do that now. Is it going to fit? Good. Probably good enough. So on this awkward shape we cut as before, but this time just cut 2 slots down here, push out the middle piece for fitting around the pipe. Piece we cut out, trim a bit off the end, and you can fit that in there, level it out with a white grout, keep it even either side, and not perfect but neat enough. So we've got the tiles in position cut around the bath, little inserts cut in where we're going to put in pipes, fill back in. So now the job is getting a very good waterproof seal around the bath, and also providing further gluing and fixing of the bath down to its frame. Already with the resin seal and the tiles, you notice now when we get in the bath there's none of that creaking going on, and there's in fact no noise at all coming out of the bath, which shows how firmly it is attached and basically how there's no movement, which is a good thing. So to get a very good water seal around the bath, which is what you want, I'm going to give it a double level of seal with polymer sealant between the tiles and the bath, filling in the gap between the tiles, and on top of that I'm going to put silicone sealant. Polymer is easy for silicone to stick to. It's the same sort of sealant they use on car body seams, which is obviously painted, and silicone have no trouble sticking to it, so you can do those 2 layers. You can either do it by hand, keeping a neat hand as I've done around the side, or if you want a really straight edge and perhaps where it's more directly visible coming in the room, then masking tape down to limit the spread of the sealant over the tiles in the bath. So I've gone for a very thin line of polymer sealant to start with, and we'll fit that, strip off the tape, and then put silicone sealant on top in a slightly wider band. But this is really just to give us a very tight water seal around the bath. Polymer is very tacky, as I said before. We'll keep stuck to the bath, we'll stick to the tiles, sticks to anything. Give it a good push down into the gap, like so. Of course these sealants also cover up your imperfect cut around the bath. Once we've silicone sealed on top of this, then you should, hopefully with a bit of patience, have a nice smooth line around the bath where you can't really, hopefully you won't really be able to tell whether the tiles go under the bath or, as we've done here, sitting flush next to the bath. And we don't have to be too neat with our edges. All we need to make sure is that the seal goes fully down the gap between the bath and the tiles. Try and push it so that it's fairly flush against the tape, so that when you pull off the tape you won't have too much of a lip or an edge. There we go. And since we've done that, we'll pull off the tape. Have plenty of tissue standing by because this polymer sealant is very tacky, it tends to get everywhere. So you see you have a little bit of a lip where the sealant finishes. The way to fix that, just run your finger over it in a minute, just to smooth out that final bit of edging. There we go. So you can see already we've already got a much neater curve around the bath, courtesy of the sealant. Just run our finger over just really the edges of the sealant, just to push them down flush to the edge, and so on. With silicone you can do this, or it helps to do this with a wet finger. Polymer, I don't think it makes quite such a big difference. Probably would help a little bit, but if you do it quick enough, you don't really need to have it wet because the sealant is already quite free flowing, so don't leave it too long. So there we go. That's most of the job with the bath done.
So note how we sealed around the bath between the tiles and the wall before putting the wall tiles on. Then we're going to have a double level of water seal with this seal and the next seal between the two tiles to make sure water doesn't get underneath the tiles. So positioning the tiles, but a little bit above where the final position is going to be on the wall, just to have a little chance to give it a little wiggle to make sure that the adhesive is finally tacked onto the wall. And I like to use these spacers, just push in a little bit so that you can easily get them out. Spacers help to not only space the tile, of course, but actually align it vertically and horizontally correctly. Also, obviously I've checked these with the spirit level when I started off. Doesn't do any harm to double check now and again. So that is completely level. Make sure you leave a little bit of a gap between the two tiles at the bottom, so you've got some room to push in the sealant, so you get a better seal between the two tiles. Waterproofing between the two is of utmost importance, of course, for the longevity of the job. And measure where the tiles are going to come at either end of the wall, so that you don't have a big increasing gap as you go to one end. If you need to start cutting the tiles, as I'm going to do here, because this level is the level of the bath is fractionally different from the true level, so as the tiles are coming over here, I'm going to have to cut a little bit of a bottom off the tile to maintain a small gap between the two, which isn't a problem. A gap of a couple of mil like this is about right, so you can push the sealant in to get a good water seal. Here I've decided to fit a mirror on the wall to make the wall a bit more interesting, and use the black tiles to create a border. The diagonal cuts here, 45 degrees, are made using this rather handy attachment to the tile cutter. It came with the tile cutter, so adjust the angle to 45 degrees, have it running, slide it up, which cuts your 45 degree angle. I decided to fit the tiles so I can accurately then measure the size of the mirror, so obviously a custom size. And to keep the tile suspended on the wall while the glue sets, just use a bit of gaffer tape. This is already set, so that can come off nicely. Now, that allows you to get all the spacing correct, hold the tiles in position. Piece of custom cut mirror glass for this from a glass cutting shop, only cost about 30 UK pounds. The size, this is about 1 metre by ½ metre. Standard glass size is 6mm, so about 2mm tile spacers just glued to the wall, and then that will bring the mirror flush with the 8mm thickness tiles. And I'll put a border down of sealant using some masking tape to get straight edges, and not only will it seal the gap but also fix the mirror in place. So position the masking tape the distance from the edge that is measured and looks about right between the two edges. Measure with the tape measure all the way along, keep it consistent, and then get your sealant gun, polymer sealant. Push it into the gap, moving slowly. Not a lot on here, going all the way around as we go. Then I won't do it all now, but basically afterwards run it flat, so it's about that. Then peel off the tape, and then you end up with something like this that covers the rough edge of the cut tile, covers the mirror, bonds the two into place, and looks reasonably neat. The rest of it's yet to be grouted, of course.
So here we're finishing the top edge, and you can see how neat the line suddenly becomes when you remove the tape.
When it comes to tiles at the top of the room, make sure your plan had cut tiles at the top of somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4 of a tile, because most roofs are not completely parallel to the floor. So for instance this one to 23.2, that dimension, 23.9 that dimension, so you have to measure each end of the tile separately, mark the line with a pencil and then cut it with your disc cutter. Then you will have a consistent line at the top of the roof with respect to the tile. Even though this dimension is actually changing, your eye won't really see this small change of 5mm, 6mm or so compared to the whole tile's width. One other extra you might think about fitting is inbuilt shelves, as we've done here. It's quite easy to mount the shelf, making effectively the mounting positions invisible by recessing it into the surrounding tiles. So here I'm going to have a shelf at this position, cut the tiles to the height you want it at, and I've pre-cut tiles that fit in the right space. Flip that in a minute. Just put a bit of polymer sealant over the end of the tile to hold the next tile in place. Doesn't have to be too neat because it's going to be, gaps are going to be grouted later. Then fit the tile on top in the rough position. Then for extra strength and thickness, fit some chipboard. But first we'll fit the edging, which again we need to glue on. A little bit of polymer sealant again. This time put on the tile edging, push that down so that it's quite flush with the tile. And then we're going to use the polymer sealant to form an adhesive to stick the tile to the ply in case there ever is any breakages. We'll have a little dab of sealant in the corners, apply an extra little bit of security to it. Then on with the piece of ply, could be any old piece of filling, piece of wood, chipboard. I think this is an old kitchen carcass, possibly shelf. Next step is to fit a small strip of tile. Push that well home. I would suggest having the cut edge of the tile on the bottom. I think it makes a lot of difference, but personally I think it works out a little bit better. The rough edge you can see a slight gap between the tile corner piece and the tile itself will be filled with grout later. Then we fit the next piece of tile edging. Again, a little bit more adhesive to the wood, hold it in place. A little bit more sealant adhesive on the top to hold the next tile. Then on with this tile, push the corner piece onto the tile. Job done, and then finish off tiling the rest of the wall. These are ones that put in previously. Obviously I've got a grout all around the edges after it's been grouted. Look a lot neater. Secret to getting a good cut with a scoring type tile cutter is to score it in one deep score in one go. Get the cutting edge lined up on the edge of the tile. Push down firmly with the lever, while at the same time slowly moving over the top of the tile. more likely to get a successful straight break when you put it in the jaws to snap the tile in two. If you can score it in one go, you'll stand a greater chance of getting a clean break if the score is deep. You could have a go at scoring it twice, but it's probably likely that you'll then get two score lines at a slightly different position, and when it breaks, the break line will be slightly a jagged edge as it swaps from one score line to the other, which might not matter if the tile is in the corner of a wall and hidden by another tile, but most of the time you want to score it just in one go. And when it comes to breaking, support the tile at the other end, have the tile in the breaking jaws, and then with one clean push down on the lever, you get a nice clean break and a fairly straight line. And then the next stage after tiling is grouting in all the gaps, and I like to apply sealant wherever there's going to be a lot of water, like splashed up behind the sink. And my favourite sealant at the moment is polymer sealant. This is SMX polymer sealant that I got from eBay. Quite nice and white, and for a place that's highly visible like this behind the sink, to get a nice straight edge, it's nice to apply masking tape. The SMX, or rather polymer sealant, is a lot more tacky and gives you much better bond that won't peel off or detach from an edge like silicone sealant does. It's not quite so easy to smooth over. With silicone you can apply a wet finger over the top of the sealant to give it a nice smooth finish. Not quite so easy with the polymer sealant, and the only real way to smooth that off is to rub a finger over it just after you've applied it, which we'll do now, because it's a lot more tacky, and wetting your finger doesn't really help because it's actually adhesive even through water, so it tends to stick to your finger. But one smooth, or maybe there's a little bit there, it's indented, one or two, preferably one, go over with your finger like that, gives you a fairly smooth finish. The other side, try if you can to have it fairly flat where the edge of the masking tape is. That'll do. Then as soon as you've applied it, get lots of tissues to wipe off the polymer sealant because it gets everywhere. As soon as you've applied it, take off the masking tape. There we go. There we go, nice neat seal. So either you could use silicone or polymer sealant, or polymer sealant and then a silicone sealant on top. Polymer is much better bonding. Silicone is a little bit more shiny, probably slightly easier to clean. So you take your pick. For bonding reasons I prefer the polymer sealant. And where you've tiled, perhaps where the shower's been pre-installed like on this one, I recommend putting some sealant in the edge of the shower cubicle and the tiles. I'd also recommend putting polymer sealant in the corners. Could grout over the top with your normal tile adhesive and grout. But if a wall's ever going to crack, it's going to crack in the corner, and just having grout in the corner means that the grout might crack and then water could penetrate behind the tiles, which is not a good idea. So seal all the places where water is likely to collect. So to grout the tiles, there's a number of different ways of doing it. Sometimes you might prefer to have a tube of grout. This is the same make as the adhesive and grout that we use to stick the tiles on the wall. Doing it this way gives you a fairly low amount of wastage, because you can just push the grout into the gaps like so. I don't do very much, we'll stop there, and use your finger to do a final bit of pushing in and wiping off around the edges. Not a huge amount that's wasted, that's one way of doing it, and so on. The more traditional way of grouting
perhaps would be to use a flat bladed tool like this, a sort of flexible rubber tool. Scoop some grout up and push it into the wall. It can be a little bit more messy. Can give you a little bit more wastage, but actually it's not too bad and also reasonably quick, like so. You end up with quite a lot of the grout actually on your tools you have to keep wiping off. And it's a little bit more wastage. When it comes to the pattern tiles like these ones, let's just continue down from where I started already. These have already been grouted. This grout is just in here from where it was stuck onto the wall, where it's leaked through the tiles. So here, where you've got lots of pattern tiles, then it probably is easier to use one of these tools rather than the tube of grout, because you can do a large area of grouting at a time. Do get a little bit more mess because quite often some blobs will fall down to the surface below. So make sure you regularly wipe up. Clear up the wastage. Then what you want to do, you might prefer to wait 10 minutes or so, so most of the grout has dried a little bit. But give it a bit of a wipe off, trying to stick to around the edges. Where the grout's got into these decorative tiles, that'll have to be scrubbed off later. It's really impossible to try and wipe the individual tiles without removing the grout from the gaps. So give that a bit of a wipe off. Regularly clean your sponge. Just clean off most of the thick bits of grout. Then probably after about an hour or so, when it's dried somewhat, you're going to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of wiping it off. I like to use these sponges with a rough edge on one side of it, because you can then use that to aggressively wipe the grout off where it's stuck into some of your awkward spaces. So, and after it's fully dried, you'll find there's a bit of a dry, sort of like a mist, like here, of bits of grout that's still on the surface of the tile. And for that, get a tissue and polish it off later to minimise the amount of dust you might want to add. Just a little bit of dampness to it, not too much. And then polish off the tiles like so. Try and give it a dry at the same time so you don't still have a bit of a grouty mist on it. Like so. It really shows up on the black tiles here, of course. So it's starting to look better. If you haven't got yourself one of these tools, you could use any old piece of straight plastic. This is sort of plastic you get from the motorist shops, used for applying car body filler. That will also probably do quite nicely for applying grout to the wall. Like so. Similar sort of principle. Allow it to dry a bit more, then we'll polish that later. If you decide to use these tubes of grout, they're pretty expensive for one tube. Half of it's filled with air anyhow, and costed about £8. But a much more cost effective way is to use it once, then refill it, cut the end off, well, slit to the end with a Stanley blade, refill it from your normal pot of grout, so it works out a lot cheaper, and tape it with duct tape, fold it over, duct tape it again, and that keeps the grout in. You can get it a lot fuller, and it's another way of applying your grout. Means that the grout doesn't spread around quite so much. There's less wastage, less chance of also dropping it on the floor below. So grouting, lots of different ways of doing it. It's down to your own personal preference, what works for you. Give it a couple of stages of applying and cleaning, and then polishing up later. So I remember they always used to say leave the grout to set for a day and then come back and polish it off for the next day, but you can get pretty close to a final finish by just waiting half an hour and rubbing it over with a slightly damp tissue.
concentrating on the tiles rather than the edges. As you can see, we're pretty shiny, and then just check it the next day, rubbing your hand over it to fill any rough spots. So it makes it quicker to get to the final finished surface. And after half an hour the grout is pretty solid, so even if you did happen to rub over it, it wouldn't be a complete catastrophe. As you can see, that's looking pretty shiny now. So it's easier on flat surfaces to apply the grout with a blade, but in corners like this it's easier to use some sort of tube applicator. If you haven't got these flexible tubes, then I have in the past used an old standard like silicone sealant tube, such as like one of these that happens to be used up. Get a rod and push out the plunger inside, and then refill it with grout, and that makes quite an easy grout applicator as well. I like to rub over it, smooth out with your finger, and then just wipe up the edges with a damp sponge to get an even edge. So this is how we refill the grouting tubes. This has already been cut and refilled a couple of times. Obviously take the tape off that you did have on there. Scoop in lots of grout and just use gravity. In other words, tap on the bottom, make sure the lid's on of course. So the grout goes down to the bottom. If your grout's getting a bit old and has aged a bit, and therefore it's too viscous, add a bit of water to it, give it a good stir. Make sure that it's just about enough room left at the top of the tube so that you can still close it without all the grout coming out. That'll do.
So we just need to clean up the end of the tube and re-gaffer tape over the end, fold it over and tape it again.
So the only thing that's left now during the next day is to polish off the tiles with a mostly dry tissue, maybe just a fraction, a little bit of dampness in it, in order to absorb the dust. The tiles should be nice and shiny like this, and just go over the whole lot, look for any imperfections and remaining grout that's sitting on the surface, which you should be able to just scratch off. If necessary, get a coarse sponge, add a bit of water to it, rub it off. A lot of it should just come off with a small amount of rubbing. And mostly that's the job done. So there's the pattern tiles all nicely grouted in, nice and shiny. Some silicone sealant around the back of the bath. It's actually on top of polymer sealant as well for a doubly watertight seal. The pipes are all boxed in, now painted. Also like to box in the eye of the toilet to avoid all those horrible gaps where you get spiders and cobwebs. It makes it a little bit neater. You could tile over that box section if you wanted as well. Completely up to you. I quite like just to have them gloss painted. And this is the shower that's now all tiled in, nicely waterproofed, double sealed at the bottom with shower sealant strip, which is a double section of plastic, one attached to the wall, the other to the bottom of the tray, to make doubly sure that no water gets past that edge of the shower tray, because obviously with a person standing on it, it's going to be a lot of weight and therefore the possibility of a slight amount of movement. So you need several levels of water seal to make sure it never leaks and goes down into the room below. And here we see those shelves that look a lot nicer now they're all grouted in, tiled above and below. A little bit of polishing of the tiles still to do, but fairly shiny already. And here we see the mirror. When you do the sealing strip with the aid of some masking tape, try and make sure the width of the strip it's consistent all the way around. I chose 6mm and I used that dimension for all of these edges as I went round. Helps keep it looking good. So that's the bath inset and tiled, shelves put in, the mirror recessed into the tiles, tiled all around the toilet and around the shower. So hopefully you agree that it's quite a nice tile bathroom now. Thanks for watching.